Good evening and welcome to the Italian Impact Podcast. I am your host, Stefano Mancini, and as always, I'd like to thank you, my listeners, for tuning in. I've been having some very good episodes lately, and I think today is going to be another interesting one because we've had musicians on in the past, but I think I got something a little different for you today. With that being said, I also want to encourage you, if you haven't seen it yet, the documentary that we filmed last year, Fedeltà, Soldier Prisoner. It is available on Amazon Prime. So I would encourage you, if you have not seen that, please watch it because this year marks the 80th anniversary of the construction of the chapel, and a lot of family members are going to be coming back from Italy. So I'm hoping after you see it, you'll kind of be inspired to, one, go look at the chapel, and then also, if you're interested, to come join us in September for a bunch of festivities, first of all, to welcome, the families back, but also to continue to celebrate the fact that the chapel has been very well maintained for the last 80 years. It kind of stands as a legacy of, something good that came out of, an awful time in human history. So again, please check out the documentary, Fedeltà, Soldier Prisoner, on Amazon Prime. And I also want to remind everyone, I am the new honorary consulate here in the Pittsburgh area. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I cannot approve your citizenship. I get a lot of people asking about citizenship. Mi dispiace, non posso farlo. You're going to have to just, I can try and give you some guidance on things, but you're just going to have to get that appointment in Philadelphia. I know they're difficult at times, but I encourage you to stick with it. I do think it's worth it in the end, especially if you're looking to, buy property or go live in Italy for a long time, or maybe even retire there. There are benefits to becoming an Italian citizen. So if you feel like you are interested in that, I encourage you to take a look. It's not a short process. You have to be patient, but it is a process, and like all processes, it will have an end. So, stick with it, and, I'll do my best to help you out along the way. All right. With that being said, I would like to kind of introduce my next guest because when I started doing this podcast, I was introduced to a festival down in West Virginia. And while I knew there were some Italians in West Virginia, then later I heard this story about the Manoang mining accident where a lot of immigrants were killed, primarily Italians, during a major mining accident over 100 years ago. So now, kind of fast forward, I learned there's actually a very large Italian community in West Virginia. So with that being said, I wanted to bring in, and I want to continue to support folks in these areas that are not traditionally seen as being, heavy Italian or heavy Italian American. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce a wonderful musician. His name is Stefano Pishner, and he is actually out of Clarksburg, West Virginia, and he is with the band Amici. And again, they're going to be performing, and I'm going to let him explain all of that to you. But Stephen, welcome to the show.
Well, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be on the air there in the Pittsburgh area. I don't think I've done a Pittsburgh show yet on radio, or a podcast as such.
Well, I like your attitude, and for the record, you're going to be internationally, globally downloaded. I am so just strange to say that, but I mean it just blows me away. But no, welcome to the show, and you and I have spoken before, and I kind of always like to give the mic to you, but kind of introduce the listeners to you.
Well, one of the things I want to say up front, I've done a variety of these podcasts, across the nation about, having to do with Italian American culture and Italian music and things like that. But, one thing that just keeps coming to my mind every time I do these things, I don't think that our ancestors who got off the boat and came into America ever thought they were going to be this big of a deal in radio, television, music, movies, writing, literary works or whatever. I think they were doing their best to make their way here, to make a better life for themselves. They had their own traditions and their families and all the things that they enjoyed in life, and their ups and downs and their challenges. But I don't think they ever thought they were going to be like this kind of celebrity famous in the days that passed after they had passed away. And every time I do these things, I'm thinking we still bring them to the forefront every time we do a podcast or anything like that. So it's great to do that. But I enjoy delving into my Italian heritage. I'm Italian on both sides, even though my name is Pishner, Pishner. My real name that was changed at Ellis Island was Pishoneri, Piscioneri, and my mother's last name was Alessio. It should be Alessio, and Ellis Island gave us another L, so it's Alessio. So it's kind of funny because both names are misspelled, but nevertheless, I'm Italian from both sides, and my family came from Calabria, and they came in the early 1920s through New York to West Virginia. My mother's side of the family, all of my grandparents came from a city called San Giovanni in Fiore. It's in Cosenza, so kind of like around, I'd say maybe close to the ankle area, you could say. Mm-hmm. And my father's side came from a place called Cavolonia, which is the provincia di Reggio di Calabria. And so these two cities are 3 hours apart. I've been to both of them. I've been to Italy 7 times. I learned to speak Italian, even though I understood some of our dialect that my grandparents spoke regularly. I studied some Italian, but I've made these trips 7 times. I've gone deeply into the heritage. On my mother's side, we've traced it all the way back into like the 1700s. My father's side, a few hundred years. I knew some of them because some of even my great-grandparents also came on my father's side. And so, I just grew up in an Italian household and always got involved in anything Italian. The Italian festival here in Clarksburg, I've been involved in since it started. I have done music. I'm a musician that's the thing that I do. And I'm a musician. I've been a musician since I was 9 years old. And I have played every one of the Italian festivals in Clarksburg, and we've done 45, 46 of them now, and I can remember starting to play as a 6th grader. I played for different programs, things on the stage, played for different singers. And in 1984, I formed a band with some friends, and the band's been at it since, and it's matured over the years, and it's become it holds its own. Like the Italians say, in gamba, they're in gamba. Mm-hmm. In other words, they're on their and so it holds its own. And we've played some really notable things that I didn't really see coming, but it happened. And a few years back, we were invited to play in of all places in North Carolina, and we thought, wow, Italians in North Carolina. So we went to play in North Carolina for a thing called International House. It was a gala event that they had there, and that year the theme was Italy, so we went there, and then they wanted us to come back and play in Charlotte again, and we played downtown. They had an Italian festival in the downtown area, and then we got called to go to Atlanta, Georgia. We played there, and it was very interesting playing in Atlanta, Georgia. I didn't see these places as being very Italian, but then I thought, well, people don't see West Virginia as being very Italian either. So we did that, and then one day I got a call from a guy who was in Washington, D.C. He said, can you come and play in Washington, D.C.? And I'm thinking, well, Washington, D.C., now you got the Kennedy Center, you got all these performing artists over there. Why do you want a band that plays Italian music from West Virginia? He said, well, it just looks interesting, and this is what we need, and you play what we want. And I said, well, okay, we'll do it. Come to find out that the guy who hired us was actually from West Virginia originally, and he played in the symphony there in D.C., but he was from Wheeling. And then, so we went to play this party. It was an opera party at a place, never forget, it was called Galileo's Ristorante it was somewhere around L and M and right in that area in 20-something second, I can't remember exactly. So we went to play. And I said, well, what's the deal here? And he said, well, you're playing at Galileo's restaurant. The people are from Italy who run it, and they were very much from Italy. They were from Parma. So I went and spoke with them all in Italian. He said, and they have a new opera, and they want to celebrate it with an Italian party. That's fine. They said, now, before the dinner, you're going to play during the cocktail hour there in the front of the restaurant, and you're going to play instrumental music. And then for dinner, you're going to play, I take that back, you're going to play music with lyrics, sing songs of Italian heritage. Do that in the beginning. And then the second half, you're going to play instrumental music for the dinner. He said, when all the guests have arrived, our guests of honor and everything, we'll have you play for dinner. And then when we're done, you guys go in the back. The chef has a special meal prepared for all of you. I'm going, okay, I'm looking forward to the meal, especially because these people are from Italy. They speak Italian. They got this restaurant. The whole wall was loaded with accolades of where they had been in so many different kind of magazines and USA Today and everything. And I'm thinking, this is pretty impressive, They had a florist who pulled up with, Mozart playing and opera music, and they came in with all these flowers, and a sound company that came in hooked us up, and everything was great. They left out one detail. The guest of honor was Placido Domingo.
Oh, jeez.
So here comes Placido Domingo getting out of a cab, wearing like a London fog.
And you're going to sing for him,
right?
Correct?
I'm thinking like. So I went to the guy who hired us. Said, Tony, did you really think this through? He said, what? I said, you didn't tell me Domingo's going to be here. He said, oh, he loves all this kind of stuff. And I said, and so we played, and he came in. And before we left, I asked some of the people who were running the party, which were more West Virginians, I came to find out. I said, can we get a picture with the band and Placido Domingo? And they said, let me check. So they went and asked him. He says, of course. And so we went and stood with him and took a picture. And he spoke to me just a tiny bit in Spanish and said, it was nice to meet you. And I said the same. And then we left. And then, came the gig of all gigs after so many years of playing so many different places. Last year, I had sent some information out. People, they pick and choose what they read these days. And I had talked with another guy, Anthony Nunziata, who was from New York, and he's played here in Clarksburg a few times when the band's done some openings for him. And I said, Anthony, what about New York? What about Columbus Day? I said, I know you sang that. I said, but what's the deal up there? I said, I think this band could play it. I said, I know some people in New York besides you who are that could, vouch for us. And he says, well, try this number, try this email. And most of the things, kind of just like didn't work. And I said, Anthony, he said, well, just call up there. And so I called the Columbus Citizens Foundation, who does marvelous work, and they raise, numerous amounts of dollars to help with all kinds of educational things and outreach right there in New York. And I told him who I was and who the band is, and I said, we've been doing this for 40 years. And I said, if you think this is something that appeals to you that might be useful for Columbus Day, you call me, you let me know. They said, okay. So I sent them the information. It was like just a few days later, they said, get us a video ASAP. Fine. So I sent a video up there, sent all the promo material, and they called me. They sent me an email and said, we want to see you on the red carpet stage on Fifth Avenue on Columbus Day.
Wow.
I thought, wow. So we got it. So I called the guys and I said, well, we're in. They said, how'd you get it? I said, I just sent them stuff and I just told them what we do. And their committee liked us. And so we took off for Columbus Day. The day before Columbus Day, we went to New York, and we had to be on the stage at Columbus Day itself at 7 a.m. for sound check. Worked with ABC Television. Joe Piscopo was there working with us, and met some other wonderful Vanessa Racci, Jessa V. There was just so many different singers that we were with there. And Chris Ruggiero, and there was another one, it escapes me, but all very Italian or Italian-American performers. Right. And they said, well, you're going to be the house band. And I said, okay, what do we need to do? And they said, well, you're going to play between during the as the show goes to commercial and comes back. Several of those outtakes or intakes or whatever you want to call them, you're going to be the band that plays during that to bring us back on or take us off the air to a commercial. And I said, fine. So we had all this music ready. We did numerous sound checks. ABC wanted to get it right. We wanted to get it right. We wanted to get a good balance. The cameras were, there, and it was just a great experience. And every Italian in the world you could think of in some way, shape, or form, in some way was represented in that parade. The parade was 3 hours, and I think it was 40 some blocks, and it came down Fifth Avenue, and they actually put red carpet on the street. And this stage is at the end of the parade. And they come right in front of us, and then they would pause and have the band play. And people were just so receptive to us and so excited that we were there. And we were on television on ABC7, and I think there was a simulcast also in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And so with the people who were there, the simulcast and the live coverage on television and on numerous media spots on the internet, we played for over 1 million people.
Wow. Now that's going to be an incredible, just a life bucket list. Just sit there and say, 1 million people have heard me. I mean.
Yeah, and we were the first West Virginians on that stage, and the first West Virginian Italian American group on that stage. And so what they would do during the broadcast, and the broadcast is still on. You can go to YouTube and just put in Columbus Citizens Foundation Columbus Day Parade. It's all on there. You can either watch it in segments, or I think the whole thing is still on there, or you can look at the Columbus Citizens Foundation.
Was this last year?
Yeah, just this last year in October. And so we did it, and so they said, what you'll do during the show is, like I said, you'll play intermittently during the show, but we're going to tease the audience, so they're going to wait for you at the end for you to do your own piece as the band, Amici. And I said, fine. I said, but make sure it's something, notable or memorable. And the TV station was calling me and saying, what is it? Because we got to get the rights and da-da-da-da. And I said, fine. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go hardcore classical here and do O Sole Mio. And I'm going to do, it's going to be like over the top, with the high notes, ma, na, the whole bit. And let me tell you something.
Good.
And we were in the pocket that day. It was right on the money. And they said, no, you can only play, you're going to do this 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I'm like, okay, how do you cut O Sole Mio down to 2? So I figured a way to condense it so it didn't lose any of its fervor or vigor. And so I did an interview with Giada Valenti, who is a very good singer and good performer. She's from Venice. And she just did some work with Vince Gill and Trace Atkins in Nashville. And but Giada Valenti, you can look her up. She's wonderful and fun to be with. And she was the hostess, I guess you could say, for the day, running the show from the stage every time they would come to the stage. And she did an interview with me, and we talked for a few minutes. And it's funny because live television is its own beast. It's its own way of doing things, because everything they were telling us to prepare for changed right in front of us in seconds. Like they said, well, play this. No, we're going to this. No, you're going to come back to this. And we're like in seconds. Even her interview, what she told me she was going to say and do, we had to change like at 2-3 seconds before she even talked to me. Luckily, we can go with the flow. We've been at this 40 years, so it's fine. So Giada was asking me all these different questions, and I told her, I said, I've got people watching in Italy. We have people watching in West Virginia all day. And she says, so make sure I told them where these people were and to say hello to everybody. And then she said, what are you going to sing? And I said, it's Classico Sole Mio. And she says, take it away. And we did it. And we finished, and I could hear the broadcaster, I think it was Joe Piscopo, after I finished, with the high part and everything, he goes, what a voice. And I thought, you don't know the half of it, but we did it. And then we played a little bit at the end, and they were still talking about the band on the broadcast. And then after that, I had another interview with a guy who had his own show, and it was a private thing. It's called FaceTime, and the guy was just, he was just great, because he had his act together, and he did all kinds of things. Todd Wharton, FaceTime with Todd Wharton, and he interviewed me a great deal, and I got to thank all the people that helped fund this trip, because this trip was on our dime to do it, and I raised several bucks to take the band up there, so they wouldn't have to take out of their own pocket. But it was a good, I say a couple things. For example, in this business, you're selling art, you're selling the sense of yourself, you're displaying, showcasing culture, talent, history, the language, and how you approach that with such framed in some kind of a respectful way, that pays tribute to the heritage, but also it's your take on this, in that moment while you're on stage. And I say, like if I make a recording and the band makes a recording, those to me are like electronic business cards. You send them out, people listen to them, they go, oh, we're interested in this, or we want to follow you, or we want to buy your recording. But when you go there and you do it in person, now this is the real thing. There's no turning back. You're on TV, you're live, the people are eating it up, and they had their phones going. They had
and that can make or break you right there on the spot.
Oh my gosh, because it's like you got to be in gamba, as they say, on the seat to be in the and it went so well, and people were FaceTiming with their relatives in Italy, which I'm thinking like no pressure there, because I'm not Neapolitan by any means, but the song is in Napolitano, And so afterwards we packed up and we left, and I was done with the interview. I even did a little small interview with a guy on the side in Spanish. I had to speak Spanish a little bit to this guy over on the side. He wanted to know about the band, and he was like just kind of starting out his own little podcast TV program or whatever on his own. And so I spoke a little bit with him in Spanish. And then we went to eat. And I thought, well, where else to go in New York City? Go to Little Italy and go to the restaurant called Amici. So Amici, went to Amici to eat. And I went in and I told the guy who we were and what we had done. And we had ordered a dinner. And then he came out and he says, desserts on us, get what you want. He says, we're glad you're here. And now we're following each other on Facebook and Instagram. It's been really, really nice. But that's a little bit of what we do and who we are. We've done some recordings. We're on all the music platforms. We have a website called amiciwv.com, amiciwv.com. And we love what we do. We enjoy what we do. We've played a lot of different places, and not long from now we're coming up your way, in the Pittsburgh area.
I'm actually looking forward to that. Steve, I'm going to be right back, though. I got to pay the bills. So, folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back with Stephen Pishner, the musician from Clarksburg, West Virginia, with the band Amici. Thanks to Greater Pittsburgh Travel. For any of your travel needs, let Tom and the team at Greater Pittsburgh Travel know, and they'll take care of you. For more information, call 412-331-2244 or visit their website at www.greaterpittsburghtravel.com. For all of your plumbing needs, be sure to try Palucci Plumbing. Nick and the team have decades of experience and will get you back up and running. For more information, call Palucci Plumbing at 412-782-5050. And we want to thank the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. If you're interested in learning more, you can find their contact information on Facebook at Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. Again, thanks Domenica and the team at the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh for your support. And we want to thank La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei, the only nonprofit school in Pittsburgh endorsed by the Italian Consulate. If you're interested in learning Italian or have your children being immersed in the Italian culture and language, be sure to give them a call at 412-404-7070. And that's La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei. We'd also like to thank Chris Gonzalez from the Knights of Columbus. If you have any questions about joining the Knights of Columbus, reach out to Chris Gonzalez at 412-605-9074. All right, welcome back. Stephen, I want to go back to something you said initially, and it was kind of interesting to me. I think it was you and I that were talking, and, we kind of, were recollecting the fact when these people came over here, it was more of a survival mode. They get on the boat, arduous journey. They come to America. Hopefully they got somebody sponsoring them. They get through Ellis Island. They come. They probably got nothing in their pocket. And they go to work. Try and make a better life for their family. Now, the interesting about West Virginia was, and even some of the southern parts, because you'd mentioned, Atlanta. And I don't think a lot of people know, a lot of Southerners, a lot of Italians from the South went to the South because they worked the fields, because when they were in Calabria, they worked the fields. So Italians became like kind of the next, for lack of a better term, iteration of cheap labor in the South. And I think a lot of people don't understand or appreciate that little detail, or the fact that they came here and worked a lot of the mines. Hence, why did they come to West Virginia? Mine work. But you said something I thought was, I just liked what you said, where they probably never envisioned that you would be thinking about them or talking about them 100 plus years later on podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to go back to, kind of recalling the point that, what do you think, if they could hear you, like if your grandparents could hear you now talking about them, and you're, what do you think they would think?
Well, I still think what they'd say, they wouldn't think anything that this was a big deal. I mean, my grandparents were so very simple. Everything they did was very simple. I mean, they knew about Italian festivals and things like that, but, their life was their family. Their life was their garden. Their life was making sure people had something to eat. That's the first question you got when you got into the house. Hai mangiato? Hai mangiato? Did you eat yet? And I don't know. I don't think that they would. I think they would even shy away from the conversation, right? Because now they would love to tell you the stories of the old days, right, in their own time,
and what it was like, right?
What it was like, or they would love to tell you stories of childhood, or they would love to tell you stories about, coming here. I mean, I had grandparents. All of my grandparents could tell you about the journey here as if it was yesterday.
Right.
On any day, whether they were having a good day or a bad day. They never lost their dialect, even being now they learned to speak English, but it was broken,
Right.
but some better than not. And one side became citizens, the other side I don't think did. And one grandfather was deceased before I was born. But these folks, they lived in the world that they could see. They tried to. The world was really too big for them in their eyes, I think. They liked just being simple with their own family, their own houses, and doing things like that. Now, they knew that there was an Italian festival in town, and but they just thought, well, that's nice, that's something to go to. But they didn't see these things like, kind of like how we see corporate America, like this is a big deal, this is a big entity,
right.
Or whatever. It's kind of like what you do with your show. Your show's a big deal, but to you it's something you do regularly, but it's a big deal when you stand back and look at it, look at the impact that you're having just to promote Italian heritage. It comes from your heart, but look what it's doing when you share all that information with however many countries that are listening to your program. I mean, that's a big deal. To them, it's like if you went to their house for dinner and it's a great dinner, which every dinner, in an Italian's house is a great dinner.
I never complain.
But I never did, but the thing is, but imagine or remember the time when you would bring somebody who wasn't Italian or bring somebody who was going to be a future spouse, to your house, and you eat this, and they're like, we never ate like this. We don't do this. And this was common to us, and I just think that they never thought, that, their family, their faith, their gardens, their way of life and things like that. And they wanted to be respectful, good Americans too. I knew an Italian woman who lived not far from here. And anytime she heard that national anthem, she made her family get up and stand with their hand over their heart, no matter where it was.
Well, they appreciate it. And that's the other thing. A lot of Americans that are born here, and I think generation after generation, I think the reverence line is what I'll call it here. It gets thinner because you don't know what you have until you lose it. And I think when those people didn't have it and they could, whoa, what is that? You mean I can work hard and work myself out of poverty and actually maybe one day be middle class or even rich, and I can send my kids to school and we can eat and we can have that. People just don't understand that. And I do think the reverence is important because without that sacrifice, you and I wouldn't be here. If those people hadn't made that decision, we wouldn't be here, wouldn't be like this.
Precisely. We stand on their shoulders.
Right. Whether they would agree with that or see that or not, somebody took a chance and came here.
Yeah. They would shy away from any of that because, again, they were humble people and they were not used to taking any kind of glory for anything. And I think, but they brought so much to the table, and Italian heritage, whether it's from Italy or from whatever country where Italian heritage is present, it brings so much to the table. I think that, years ago, there was a woman from Pittsburgh. Her name was Jane Farrow, and she started this group called I Campagnoli. It was a dance, singing folk group there. They used to come to Clarksburg. But Jane was interviewed one time, and someone said, what would the world be like without Italians? And she said, bland. And I said, I agree with you. And every culture brings something to the table. I'm not trying to be self-centered, but the point is that what the Italian community brings to the table, is something unique. And those of us who are fortunate to have grown up with Italian immigrant grandparents, it's something that you can't explain and you can't replicate. It's something that you either were there or you're not. And if you were not, then I think it's in your best interest to ask the questions, ask them to tell you the stories, read the books, read the biographies, go to the festivals, sing the songs, eat the foods, make the foods, do those kinds of things, because then you're back with them as close as you can be for now,
Right.
I mean, we still do the seven fishes at Christmas and things like that. And, we go to the festival here. I've been playing all of them. Wherever I can go, I play. I've even maintained contact with some of the relatives in Calabria. In fact, that's another whole show, Stephen. But the thing is, it's like, for example, during when we were kind of like on lockdown in 2020 during the time of COVID, I had nothing to do. But so I did two very Italian things. Number one, I decided I was going to write a memoirs book, which is still sitting on my computer. It has to be proofread, but it's ready, about how I reconnected our family, at least on my mother's side, back to Calabria and found the relatives. Because there was 60 years of silence where the letter writing just stopped. And I found them after 60 years. And I don't think my grandparents really wanted me to remake that connection, because I think what they left there, they said what they left there for a reason. And they enjoyed just having a new life. Because
real quick,
sometimes,
but I want to touch on that, because that's a very interesting thing. Because a lot of them left, unless you're running from the law, like I said, it's a necessity. Yeah. But that is something that people don't appreciate. I'm not inferring anything, but sometimes there is a little bit of bad blood, and maybe part of that was, well, you left us, and some of it was maybe they're just pissed off and I'm leaving you. So that's an interesting. How did they respond to that when you went back? Did any of that? Did you sense any of that?
Well, first of all, I have to set up the scene. So I'm going to just talk about my maternal side at this point, because this is the track where I did most of this work. So on my mother's side, my grandparents really didn't. They wanted to tell me everything about Italy, about San Giovanni in Fiore, in Cosenza, but they didn't really want me to go there, I don't think. And they really didn't want to maintain because there were some issues there with, not so much with family fighting or running from the law, but sometimes there were issues with, a child was trying to figure out, is this my mother, is this my father, because of those kinds of issues. And I found out stuff I wasn't supposed to know, but it took me many years and many trips, and then I figured it out once I got it. Just a few years ago, I figured it out here. That was on mom's side. On dad's side, when I went back, I had one grandmother still alive here. When I came back, she was excited. She wanted to see her old church. I brought films back and everything, and we did all that. But when I went the first time, let's just say, and my grandparents' relatives were with me there, they had so many questions about what did he do, what was he like, what happened here, how much this and how about that, And I found out some really neat things, in the sense that my grandfather left when he was young. He came with his uncles this is my mother's father. He came to the United States, and he didn't want to go back. And so when it was time to go back, his uncles and his father left. They left without him, and he went and hid in his cousin's house in the basement. And he wouldn't go back. They couldn't find him. So he stayed. Now, I think the cousin probably said, he's here, I'll take care of him. Go ahead and go. He doesn't want to go back. Right. But and there were some issues where he was like, who was my real mother? And I think there were some issues there at some point. And I got into that, which I wasn't supposed to find out. But those, to me, that's the richness of the story. That's life.
Right. Well, I was going to say, that sort of thing happens. It's not unique. I respect, one thing I do respect about it is, I don't want to sound judgmental, but there is something to be said where nowadays it's almost like people have no shame with anything they do. And that doesn't mean we have to be perfect, because we're not capable of being perfect. Yeah. The good book says that we're all sinned.
No, right.
We can't be perfect. But at the same time, right. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, at least have a little bit of, I hate to say it like this, a little bit of shame when you do mess up. It's not that.
Well, you own it.
Right. And I think, right. And they don't do that anymore. They're just like, it's like, look at me. Okay, so what? I did this. Yeah. It's like, have a little bit of.
Yeah. It's one thing to be extreme, but it's right. On either side. Somewhere, right. Moderation. But I mean,
in all things, absolutely.
In all things. So when I went back, they were asking me different things, and they were asking my aunt. Two of my aunts and my uncle went with me. So I was there, and it was funny, because the very first thing one of my cousins said to me, he says, "Tell me the words." I said, "What words?" He said, "Tell me the words." I said, "The secret words." I said, "Paolo, what are we talking about?"
Oh my
And he
God.
said, I'm thinking like, okay, what did I get myself into? So I said, well, what are you talking about? He says, your grandfather, they would send to go get buckets of water and bring it back to, I guess, the farm or wherever they were. And I said, okay. And I said, what's the deal? He says, well, they would send him on this pass where they knew there were these really mean dogs that were like wolves or whatever, and because they knew that those dogs would chase him and he'd have to run with these buckets of water, and they would always say, well, you go do it. And there was some way that my grandfather would put the buckets down, and he would say certain words, and these dogs would lay down and not bother him. I never knew this story. All the years I spent with my grandparents, not one time did they tell me this story. So that was one of the things. I said, I'm sorry, I don't know the story, I don't know the words, I don't know anything about it. The second story was that when I went to see my great uncle Rosario, who lives in this place called Isola Caporizzuto, it's outside of Crotone. They have a farm that goes down to the Ionian Sea. Beautiful place. You can get, you know what ficcanindia are? You can get ficcanindia. It's like a prickly pear, but it grows on this big, huge kind of cactus thing.
That sounds very familiar.
They're ready in September. That's the best time to get them. But they have a whole farm filled with that and all kinds of vegetables, and they have some animals and nice houses and beautiful land and trees with olives and stuff like that. And it goes down to the beach. And there's a beach there at the end of the property. We went and walked with the kids one night, I remember. But so my uncle, my great uncle says I cried and cried when your grandfather, my brother, left. And I said, yeah, that's understandable. And he says, but I also cried when the babysitter left. And I said, what do you mean the babysitter? He says, your grandmother was my babysitter. Oh. And I'm thinking, like, here's what's interesting. So my grandmother, before she was married, babysat her future brother-in-law and didn't know it.
Wow.
Stuff like that, going to the courthouse and going through records, and I couldn't find my grandfather. And I couldn't find him. And I'm going like, well, where is he? And no one wants to tell me the story, And so I go through that in my book, and I finally find out who he is and everything about that. So that's what I wrote in my book. But the beginning of the whole thing is what's funny, because it's like playing the lotto. You just don't know, if you get the number fine, or it's like when you're watching The Price is Right and they're playing the game Plinko. They drop that disc down, and you don't know what slot it's going to hit in. So after I had, my two grandparents on my mother's side had died, and I was talking to one of my aunts. I said, well, who's left in Italy? I said, this just always intrigues me. I was like 18 years old. I had 75 questions and no answers. And they told me, so I thought, I got to figure this out. This was before the days of internet. This was before the days of Ancestry.com, any of those kinds of things. So I thought, all I got right now for to have access to is a telephone. So I picked up the telephone and I pushed 0. And I said the operator in West Virginia, I said, would you get me information in Italy? She said, okay. So she starts to talk with the Italian operator, and I can hear where the Italian operator is more British trained and the West Virginia operator is more West Virginia accent, and this was kind of bumpy. And I said, so I interrupted. I said, if you let me speak with her directly in Italian, I think I can make this go a little faster for us. And she said, okay. So I asked the woman in Italy, the operator there, I said, find me. I gave her the name. I said, Maria Alessio. And she starts laughing at me. And I said, why are you laughing? And she says, ci sono tanti, ci sono molti Alessi. And there's so many. I'm going like, I guess I was asking like, Mary Smith.
Yes, it's Jane Smith now.
Yeah. So I start talking. So I said, well, listen, give me 3. And she said, okay. So she gives me 3. So I got these numbers, and I went over to see my aunt, because I couldn't speak hardly very much Italian in those days. It was 1984. And I said, one of these I think could be our relative. I said, let's just try this first one I wrote down. It says Maria Alessio. So my aunt still had a rotary dial phone. So, you had there was a lot of numbers you had to dial, 011390984, and then you had to buy the home telephone number, and you have to wait for the dial to come back. And your audience is probably chuckling with me. And the kids, if there are any young people,
I'm remembering it. I didn't
Yeah,
call
yeah,
international, but I definitely remember rotary phones because I grew up like
and,
that.
Yeah, you're the younger ones, if they're listening to this, are like, "What is a rotary dial phone?" Go look it up. But anyway,
Exactly.
it's a fun.
Well,
It's
I
a
tell you what's
fun
funny
ride.
because you don't realize how in a very short period of time how much technology has changed.
Oh, overnight, you could think of
Yep.
it in that way. So I would make a connection, and you can hear that that underground cable, that tone that would go doo, and you wait, doo, and then somebody comes on and says pronto. I'm like, yes, we got somebody. So we're talking to this woman, and her name says my aunt says, Maria Alessia. She says, sí, Maria Alessia. And we're talking, and she says, my dear one, she says, I'm sorry to tell you, I enjoyed talking with you, but I'm not your cousin. So we say, she says, but I've got good news for you. She says, I know who your cousins are. They live down the street from me. You call me next Sunday, and I will give you the telephone number, and you can call them directly. We said, great. So the next Sunday, I hightailed it over there after Mass, and I told my aunt, I said, we got to make this phone call. And they go, are we really going to do this? I said, yes. I said, if you're not, I'm going to struggle, and I'm going to do it. I said, well, we're going to do it. So we go through this whole thing, dialing this number again, and this woman gives us the number. She says, you call them. They're waiting to hear from you. And I thought, we got a connection. And then we called immediately after we got off the phone with the first Maria, and then we got the real Maria, and Maria Teresa, and she talked with us. And we tried within 20 to 30 minutes to fill in 60 years of missing information. And gaps.
So it was her, though. It was correct.
We got her,
Wow.
and one thing led to another. I found out that she had a son who actually came to Clarksburg looking for my grandfather, couldn't find him, and my grandfather kept this name that he had, and he had a little card, and we found it when my grandfather died, and then we found it again when my grandmother died, when they went through stuff, and the name that the woman in Italy told us, my aunt says, let me go look at that name in the drawer, and she goes, that's the same name. The guy was here in the 70s. And somebody brought it to my grandfather. My grandfather, again, very simple, says, no, there's no way that could be anybody related to me. They're too poor to come here. There's no way they could come to West Virginia from Italy in these days. But he kept the card. And so...
Do you think that was the reason?
I don't know. It may have been. Maybe he just didn't want to be rediscovered. I don't know. Right. But other people would come, and they weren't standoffish to them. But I mean, this might have been too much to believe. It may have been just too. It might have been too emotional. I don't know.
Well, that's a very important point because, like I said, there's a lot of emotions going on through this. I mean, I really don't think people understand. Immigration today is very different than it was 80, 90, 100 years ago. You just didn't talk as much. I mean, a lot of times you were gone, and maybe you went back one time before you died, or maybe eventually, like your point, in the 60s, you finally got a phone to call over there, if you remembered them. Because the other thing is, there was a war, between some of them. And I don't know when your family came over. There was a war. So It wasn't like you were just picking up the phone, and then there was Reconstruction. There was, Italians weren't even allowed to immigrate here for a bunch of years. So not until the 50s did you start to have some normal immigration coming back to the States. But by then, you may have been 20 or 30 years removed, in which case, what was the incentive to reconnect?
Well, and the other thing is, life was much easier and better here. I mean,
right.
My grandfather became a coal miner on my mother's side. My other grandfather, he did some other factory work and some other kinds of things. He had a farm and everything. You talked about the Monongah mines situation, in the early 1900s. That's very prevalent here where I live. It's not far from me. And my grandfather told me about that. He knew about all of that. And we even had some pictures, I think, from that. And I met a bunch of those people who came from Italy during that rediscovery time when Mr. DeAndrea,
Joe, that was
Joe, when he came
my
down,
mentor.
Joe came down and and then there were people that came from Italy, so they called me in to play music for that mass that they had to commemorate that whole Monongah mine disaster. So I was with some of those people, some of those reporters.
And by the way, that's how I found out about it. It was Joe. To your point, if it wasn't for people pushing to keep this stuff alive, those people would have been forgotten. And that's a shame because in those cases, They came over here, they worked, not just the Italians, but, I'm just focusing on, but there was other
Sure.
ethnicities. They worked these, they worked literally to death in some cases. And you know
Yeah.
what? They gave their lives. And I don't think it's fair that we just simply dump history down the toilet. And by the
No.
way, it was Joe that introduced me to the story in Chambersburg, which I ended up making the documentary. So
Right. That's Fedelta.
yeah, that's why I said
Yeah.
I really appreciated the fact that he pushed to keep a lot of this stuff alive.
Well, and the other thing is that there's just common decency and respect for human life, in these stories.
Right.
Like for example, to have the people come from Italy and to there's a monument and a huge silver bell in that cemetery.
I was there last year when they did for the holiday that celebrates the Italian workers that were killed overseas, and they actually rang
right,
it.
yeah.
Fantastic.
Right. Yeah. So there that, and then you mentioned this documentary, this Fedelta, that you did this documentary on the Italian prisoners of war and these kinds of things that you've studied and talked about. Because West Virginia had them as well, and
Right.
But Camp Dawson, which is not far from me, it's about an hour or so away, I think, up the mountain. But in Preston County, we had prisoners of war in the 40s, during the
Right.
war, and there's a woman in my parish where I go in here at Bridgeport at All Saints in West Virginia, and she, along with her mother and some of their family, would go and visit these prisoners and have a picnic with them. And these guys didn't want to be in the war,
Yep.
and they didn't want to go home either. They
Yep.
wanted to stay. They wanted to stay here.
There is a recurring theme with a lot of the Italian prisoners, and
Yeah.
I think that is. And you know what? I'll add one thought to that. There is a very, very bad misconception that because they, surrendered, that they were cowards. If you understood politics and if you understood the country at that time, most of those people had no desire. We are not I've said this before. We are not natural enemies. See, there are certain countries that have just, like, through their history, I mean, you can look at the Middle East, for example, that have always just been at war. Italy and the U.S. are not natural enemies. So to all of a sudden spend that on war, they're going to fight the Americans. They didn't want to do that. And,
They didn't want to do that.
right. And then you're coming in there with World War I equipment, World War I tactics against, the Allied powers. It didn't take them long for them to say, yeah, we're out of here. What was holding them there was Mussolini. What was holding him in there was Hitler. And once those pieces were removed, then they were able to kind of get things right. But, it's easier said than done.
But it's again, life happens.
Right.
It goes up, it goes down. Things are good, things are bad. But it's how we respond to them, and I think it's how we keep our eyes moving. Moving forward, looking at the future. And that's one of the things with the Italian heritage. Like for example, I see at the Italian festival, I've seen the evolution of what's there. I remember the early days when you heard more people speaking Italian, and you had
Right.
all of the older folks who were there. They were the immigrants, and we didn't even talk about first generation people. We talked more about immigrants. Now we talk about what generation are you. But I still see that story unfolding. That's why, just to make sure that the story doesn't get not told or get buried, that the story remains. It's still an open conversation.
Right.
I still think it's an open conversation. Ellis Island is a wonderful place to visit, because you see so much of what people did, and just to get here, and you think, to come to the United States now, it's simple. You get on a plane.
Right.
Well, I watched this movie years ago. It had a profound impact upon me, and it was called The Golden Door. It has an Italian name too, but it was just called. It was sold here. You can buy it on Amazon, but I watched it on the. I read an article about it from the National Italian American Foundation. It had won something at the Venice Film Festival several years ago. It was called The Golden Door, and it just basically, tracks a family who is leaving Sicily, all guys, father and uncle, and some of their boys, and they're leaving to come to the United States. And it's just a movie that just goes through the whole journey. What was it like to be on a boat for a month? What happens if somebody dies? What do you do with the body? They would just throw it overboard. Are you going to get there? And it's just funny. They had to fight to get on the boat. In fact, so that they would look decent, they went to the undertaker of the village to borrow clothing to wear so they would look nice, just so they could fight to get on the boat. And then when they got to the place to get on the boat, they had to convince them to let them get on the boat. And they all got on the boat. And then they sail across the Atlantic for a month. They meet people on the boat. They make relationships. They end up in New York City. They go through that whole rigorous, testing of, are you this? Can you see? What's your health like? Are you educated? All those kind of stuff at Ellis Island. And one guy was not educated enough, and they sent him back. And they didn't want him to go back by himself, so his uncle went back with him, and the rest stayed.
And again, that's another common misconception is somehow if you came from Europe, you automatically got in. No, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
We've always had rules and limitations on immigration in this country. Always.
Well, some were in, some were out.
Right.
Some came. We didn't even know who they were.
Right.
But others couldn't come here. Some of my relatives went to South America.
That's right. A lot of them did. In fact, well, I was going to say, is the consulate. I do a lot of passports for Italian citizens in the area, and a lot of them are coming in here with South American passports and Italian passports, even now.
Yeah. And I can remember in the day on my mother's side, my grandparents, they would get a visit every January from someone in the government, and they would have to fill out these alien forms. I don't know what they would call them. I always call them alien forms, alien forms, or whatever. And they would come, but after a while they quit coming. So I don't know, did they become citizens? Did they not become citizens? Did they say, well, these people aren't a threat? What's the problem?
Right.
But they lived in the day. My grandfather and grandmother lived in the day, or in their neighborhood, where they could actually see people burning crosses on the hills not far from them. They were not, Italians and Catholics were not super welcome in certain instances.
That's right.
In those times of history. We even have deeds in the courthouse here in Clarksburg that say may not sell to blacks or Italians. And they're still there, plain as day. I've seen them. And, I can remember there's just so much stuff. And, good and bad, we survived it. We're surviving it. We're learning, and we're now, I think, in what I call preservation mode. I think promote, preserve, and share our heritage. It's not an us and them thing.
Right.
It's all of us. It's all of us. Come and see who we are. We will do the same. I mean, I can remember when the Italian Festival started here in Clarksburg in 1979. My mother, my sister, and I were walking up to watch them set up for the festival. Nothing like this had ever come about. And we went to see a window that there was an Italian tailor who had many things that they brought from Italy that they were in the windows, and they showed how they made lace and how they made dresses and different beautiful things, and their own costumes of the day with what they called the costume from San Giovanni is called the pacchienne, and it's a black dress with a white headpiece and a kind of like a little bit of a vest and some white lace near the neck. Beautiful. But they brought these things from Italy and they put them in the windows for us to see, in those days. And I can remember a woman stopping us, and she used the racial slur about Italians, and she says, I never thought that these would be taken over the city like this. Isn't this a darn shame? And she didn't know we were Italian. Well, that's all my mother. I thought my mother needed to hear, And my mother told her, she said, well, the people that you're talking about would be me and my daughter and my son who are standing here. She goes, I wondered because your son had dark hair and I did. And my mother said, I suggest you walk on that side of the street and maybe head out of the city. But I didn't know until I was in the 6th grade that we were a problem.
Yeah, again, a lot of discrimination against the Italian community, but that's what you know what I'll say, like, is you don't hear the Italians complaining. That's the difference. We just work hard, put our head down, do the best we can, and push forward, push through it.
We had studied, and don't get me wrong, I don't think it's anything like maybe what the African American community has gone through historically by any means. But it was startling to me as a 12-year-old that my culture was a bother to somebody or a threat to somebody.
And it depended on what areas, to your point, though, because the areas was pretty bad. I mean, there were lynchings. I mean, it was bad.
Oh my God! Oh yeah. So, down in was it Louisiana?
Yep. Now, Stephen.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm way over my time, but I'm going to tell you what. I actually really enjoyed this. But before
I did too.
but before, I don't want to just cut you off though. But what I want to do is give you a chance to tell folks, how can they follow you? How can they learn more about you? Where can they go? And I'll put all this in the description, but I want to hear it from you as well.
Sure. Well, okay. So you can follow me on Instagram, and it's at Stefano Pish, which is on there, easily to find. You can go to amiciwv.com. That's amiciwv.com. And most of my links are on there for the music and the things that I do. You can go to Facebook and do Amici in America, and you'll find me there. That'll get you started. And of course, I'll send you all the other things.
And again, it'll be down in the description for folks. Now, I want to ask you one final question before we leave, because I've always wanted to ask a long-term musician this. So you've been playing, again, a lot of traditional songs for a long time. Let me ask you, do you ever get burnout?
No, because the energy from the people rejuvenates you. Because you play better as they stand there and just take it in. And I like I said, I had sung O Sole Mio for 40 years, and here I'm singing it on Fifth Avenue in New York, and it was like I was singing it for the first time with people because of the energy that I was receiving back. So no, not really.
That's fantastic. Actually, that's fantastic to hear.
I say positive with it, and there's always something to learn every time you play a song or read a book or hear a show. There's something new. But I enjoyed it, and I think it's a way to make for at least in the moment, people can forget their troubles and be happy for a little bit.
Music should do that. That's fantastic. That's why entertainment is so important. Mr. Pishner, I want to thank you again for joining me today. I think this was a great one. It was funny because we talked, so how long is it going to go? Yeah, like we're way over. But I was loving it. And you said a lot of things that kind of got my brain clicking. And I find out that there are a lot of people that are kind of in the same boat as far as, we want to preserve it. We want to honor the memory. Why do we do this? We want to honor people. We want to honor those who sacrificed to bring, to come over here. Maybe they brought their young children over. They grew up, they had kids, and they worked hard. And it is a legacy, and it's what defines the culture in a lot of ways. It's not limited to just the Italians, but it is our culture. And so we want to celebrate that and remember those people. Don't want them to be, a dusty grave that, you walk by in the cemetery and say, I wonder who that was. I don't want that. And I don't want that for anyone. But again, I want to thank you very much. Now, I know you're going to be playing down in Clarksburg soon, and people can go out to your website and check out where you're playing. But for the folks, I'm going to end the show today with a song from Amici, and it's Gloria. By the way, I didn't realize this is an Italian. Was this an Italian song before it was in English?
Yes. Giancarlo Bagazzi and Umberto Tozzi wrote this piece.
I always wonder why I hear I hear it in Italian. I'm thinking, why do they love this song so much? But now that makes sense. So, folks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close it out with Gloria from the band Amici. And again, that's from Clarksburg, West Virginia. So please go down in the description. You can go out to the website. You can follow him. I really encourage you to listen to them. And I like what you said, Stephen, that, when the bands or, when the crowds follow you, I want people to get engaged, to fire you up, to get you energized, then you bring the energy back to them, and it makes it a really enjoyable evening. So I think that's wonderful. All right, and I'm looking for, when you come to Pittsburgh, you make sure you let me know. I want to promote you, and more than anything, I want to hear you live. So I can't wait. I'm going to try and get my butt down to Clarksburg as well this year. So God willing, I will.
There.
Awesome.
We'll be there.
All right, Stephen, now thank you again for joining. And folks, as always, I want to thank you for tuning in, and enjoy the song.
Nell'aria, ma anche ad una mano che lavora piano, ma anche questa bocca che il cibo più non tocca, e sempre questa storia che lei la chiamo Gloria, Gloria sui tuoi fianchi. La mattina nasce il sole, entra odio ed esce amore, dà nome Gloria. Gloria, Gloria, aspetto gloria. Lascio aperto il cuore, scappa senza far rumore, da lavoro, da tuo letto, dai gradini di un altare, ti aspetto gloria. Gloria, per chi tende giorno e invece di dormire con la memoria torna a un tuffo nei papaveri in una terra libera. Per chi respira nebbia, per chi respira rabbia, per me che senza gloria contenuta sul divano faccio stelle di cartone pensando gloria. Gloria, manchi tu nell'aria, manchi ed una mano che lavora piano, manca questa bocca che cibo più non tocca, e sempre questa storia che lei la chiamo gloria. L'ore sui tuoi fianchi, la mattina nasce il sole, entra odio, esce amore, dal nome gloria.